Hey, so I'm back. I just got done repairing all the stuff that Gracie knocked over trying to kill me. Come on, Gracie, kid. Come on, kid. So anyway, the coffee that I'm eating as a snack is, I'll show you. It's something I bought here in near Baton Rouge. It's called French Settlement. And it's from this area, except the coffee beans are I specifically bought this one because the coffee beans are Guatemalan, and it says medium roast. I actually normally like a light roast. Some people like dark roast and stuff like that, but that's not my thing. It tastes burnt to me. But you got to remember too, down here, a lot of the people, especially from some of the more rural towns, small towns and stuff like that, have a kind of a strong French accent. It's not French French, it's American French, or what you call Creole. But I mean, a French person very often, and I've heard this, will listen to somebody that's speaking kind of more of a Creole, and they'll understand most of it, but not all of it, because there's a whole bunch of, basically, we say made up, but it's basically slang that's taken on its own, you know, its own thing and become part of a language. Just like the English language, when listening to a British person speak, the most common question they'll get in America is what? I have a friend that's British, and he told me that very thing. He said the most common question I get is what? And we always like, you started English. How come you guys don't speak it? But it's slang. So anyway, this is what I eat for a snack mostly. It's coffee beans. They're roasted. So they're really good. They're crispy. They're crunchy. They taste like coffee. They're healthy for you. There's no, fat from like deep frying. There's no salt. And it jazzes you up. So most people that know me would say you don't need that. But we all got to take our lumps. Guys, this is your time to take your lumps. All right. So yes, I'm sorry you got to put up with Steve with more jazz. I told Karen when we first started hanging out in like 2011 or so that we were hanging out as friends. We were just chilling. And I told her, I said, you got to be, just in all fairness, you got to watch out with me because I knew by that time, So I'm like a pet monkey. I'm cute, I'm funny, all the stupid things I do, it's hilarious. I'm always lively and all that. But there's the other side of me that's not as fun, and I try to reserve that for when people aren't around. But just like a monkey, a pet monkey, that shit gets old after a while, People can only take that so long before it just starts to drive them nuts. And I'd seen that over and over again in my life, whether it was at work or at home, whatever. I warned her. And it is like that. What's really bad is when you annoy yourself. There's nothing I can do about that. I can't get away from me. So yeah, that's a thing. That's a real actual thing. It's funny, over time, I have learned to sort of separate the different parts of my personality. And I joke to myself and occasionally to others that it's like I have more than one person living in there, like multiple personalities, which, some people call that insanity. But every person I've ever admired seems nuts as fuck. Hey, Frank. So I'm not scared of that. I do not have schizophrenia. I know all the classic signs, and I don't have that. But I have learned over time to develop these other parts of my personality and basically treat them as people, individual people. That helps me in a way. It's all tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I always imagine it as it's ancestors of mine. They're bored and they don't have anything to do but hang out in my head. And there's different ones, you know. Some of them are assholes, you know, like they're my personality, I suppose, or even worse. Some of them are straight assholes. I'm not that bad. When you see me being a complete asshole, I think it's a couple of different relatives that are just bored as fuck, and their sense of humor is odd. Now, some of those other personality people, traits, are really smart and have a lot of wisdom. If I would just listen to them, I would behave that way. And occasionally, I listen to somebody who's yelling in the background, and people around me are like, "Wow, he's not completely an idiot," you know. I am, mostly. It's all about who I'm listening to at that moment. And Stephen King, when he's writing, he consults the guys in the basement. You know, the people with the crazy thoughts and the crazy ideas. He separates that out, and he talks about that he's talking to the guys in the basement in his head. You know. Imagine that there's probably 5 or 6, and it probably rotates. I don't know. Out. I have a lot of, you know, everybody has a lot of dead ancestors. But, and you know, most of my dead ancestors I never met. You know, I mean, obviously there's some that it's not possible for me to have met. But even my father's people, my father was not big on me meeting his side of the family. I met one of my cousins in AIT in the Army in Georgia, and neither of us were from Georgia. He was from Mississippi, and I was from Oregon, or Iowa at the time. But we were hanging out because both of our last names were Underwood, at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And I called home at this place called Phone City back when you had to have payphones to call home. I was telling my mom about my life at AIT and all this. And he was down the way at a different phone. There was a zillion phones there, phone booths. And I was telling her about this, my buddy Underwood, you know, and his first name was Clayton. And my mom heard that I mentioned that first name to her, and she said, "Clayton Underwood?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "That's your cousin." And I said, "Whatever, Mom." Like I just accidentally hanging out with my first cousin. But I had never met any of them, hardly. I met 3 of my cousins that were from my dad's side of the family. Yeah, all on one vacation. And but there was a lot more. Anyway, I yelled down. I said, and I said, "Mom, it's not who you think it is. There's no way." And my mom asked, "Is he there?" And I said, "Yeah, he's down the way talking to his family." And she said, "Ask him what his mom's name is." And I stepped out and I said, "Hey, What's your mom's name? My mom thinks we're cousins. And he laughed. And he told me his mom's name. Told my mom. She said, that's your father's sister. What? And she said, that's your dad's sister. I yelled down to Clayton. I said, hey, we're cousins. Your mom is my dad's sister. My dad is your uncle. So neither one of that parts of the family told everybody like us what their uncles and aunts' names were. So it just so happened that both of us were at AIT at the same time, hanging out because our last names were the same. I mean, we were buddies. We were the two people, that were hanging out with each other randomly. And it's funny, back then there was no Facebook. And so I've never talked to him or seen him again since then. That was in the 80s. Yeah, life is weird. So my dad told me we had lots and lots of conversations, and my dad's marriage to my mom at that time was difficult for him. They were, for both of them, I'm sure. They were going through a phase where I don't know, once a week or once a month, all of us kids would get together and ask them, are you guys getting a divorce? And they'd be like, no, we've already been there. They had already been divorced from their first marriages. And that's how they got together, and married each other when my mom already had my two older brothers, Jim and Vern. And she was working at a store, and my dad had seen her a lot because, at every function, they had lots of Navy functions where the families would all get together. And the whole point was when the guys are out to sea, which was a lot, that, the families, the wives would have each other, as a support network. And so my mom said she saw my dad many times at these different functions, but she thought he was an asshole because he always seemed really quiet and really unhappy. He always had a scowl. Well, by that time, my dad had been married 11 years, and according to what he found out later, much later, what was that she was cheating on him since the day he went to boot camp, with just kind of every swinging dick, apparently. And he had just recently found out that she was cheating on him with his best friend. And I don't know if they were on different boats or like opposite watches or whatever. So like when he was on shore time at home, the other fellow was out, on the boat. I don't know. So what it sounded like that was to me, what I've kind of pieced together over time. And the kids fucked up and accidentally mentioned things that were details, that could only be that. And he had 3 kids at the time. Yeah. He didn't want to get divorced. First off, that was a big sin. And even if he got divorced, he wouldn't have his kids. And, who would take care of him? All the things in his mind made it to where that he was just suffering. He was, I can't imagine, I've been divorced twice. I'm married a third time. In my family, the only person that's never been divorced is my sister. One of them. And I take it back. Also, my 2 oldest brothers, Joe and Dave, they never got divorced. And both of them, my brother Dave could have easily gotten divorced, over time. That's the kind of stuff I would have gotten a divorce over, And my brother Joe was schizophrenic from the time that he was an adult in his, I guess they figured it out in his 20s or so. But that was a direct translation from his mom, which was not my mom. My dad used to tell us stories, stories anyway, about their mom. It was really, he never said schizophrenic or anything like that, and I don't think she was diagnosed at the time. But it was really obvious that that's what it was he was talking about. She later died of cancer, but he used to tell us before she died, apparently, he used to tell us that she would eat Vicks, like the Vapor Rub. It's petroleum jelly with a eucalyptus in it or something like that. Anyway, it's not meant to be eaten. And she would eat it like almost like a cough drop kind of a thing to clear her sinuses and stuff like that. And then later down the road, she died of some kind of crazy cancer. Don't eat, Vaseline. Not a good idea. And but anyway, she used to have a lot of problems. So anyway, my oldest brother Joe developed schizophrenia, and there were quite a few events out of it, much less the ones that we didn't hear about. So the fact that his wife, my sister-in-law, never divorced him is a huge, huge credit to her. Obviously she loved him, and she wasn't a leaver. Some people are. I'm a leaver. If things are going bad, it don't matter what's, you make a commitment. Yeah. When you make that commitment though, I don't care what the oath is that you take. When somebody that you're with goes straight nuts and nobody gives a fuck about you in the situation, if you're going to stay sane, you have to figure out a way to get out. Even my second marriage, I was committed to not getting divorced once I figured out. Her dad, my second marriage, when I got married, I didn't know what was going on with it. But when we got married and we're done, and we were, heading from everybody was sort of heading from the place where we got married at to the place where the reception was, which is on the same property, just one location to another. Her dad kind of got close to me at some point. He said, "Now she's your problem." And I was like, "What? What was that? Weirdness? Why would you, what?" And I thought, and later I justified that to myself later that day as thinking that he was just being funny, Because, like I say, I had known her for 2 months like a moron, and I didn't know her demons yet. I became acquainted with them. I had already met them, but I thought they were just normal stuff. She was a college kid at the U of O with like 5 jobs, 5 part-time jobs, like 4 part-time jobs, including being a full-time student at a tough school. Boy, I was wrong. My thought was once we got married, I had a better income, and that, she could then quit all of them but one, maybe, and just keep one of the best jobs and going to school, which is still rough. That's not easy, having a job and going to school at a college like U of O. But that wasn't the problem. I really thought it was stress that was waking that little dragon up in her occasionally. And I was incorrect. Yeah. Back in the day when there was no divorce and stuff like that, there was a lot of abuse, I'm pretty sure. And it was overlooked by society because that was just how it was. You didn't get to know somebody well enough before you got married. That's how that worked. Anyway, my dad's first wife was a trip that way, apparently. My brother, and it was kind of lucky too. My oldest brother Joe was the only one that got that from her. Dave, my brother David, who was the 3rd kid down from Joe, he's got cancer, and I don't know how it's going to go. I don't have much contact with him because political stuff has really separated people, and if you're not hardcore religious, Or I'd say if you are hardcore religious, you're almost guaranteed to be in one of those camps, and I'm not in that camp. So, and I love David. He's a great, great man. He's he has no flaws that I could tell. Um, he's at the same kind of work his whole life. I don't know if he does it anymore, if he's retired or what, but he would make casts and set people's, doctor would set somebody's thing and then he would put a cast on it. He made prosthetic limbs uh, for a company. I don't know if the company was directly a hospital or what, but anyway, that's what he did. And we talked before about his work, and it was really interesting. A lot of technical stuff, getting things to fit right and all that kind of stuff, which is a big deal. He said he put a cast on Tom Selleck's ankle one time in Chicago because he broke it during a fight. Yeah. But Dave's wife was a challenge, and there was a lot of really weirdness in the very beginning of their relationship, and it only got weirder, and they never got divorced. So Dave is the man. Dave doesn't have the same last name as I do because when his mom and my dad split, the guy that was my dad's best friend, who she was cheating with, stepped in and they got married. And then it was funny. My whole life, when it came around Christmas time and stuff like that, they would send off these presents to these mystery kids that we had never met. And I was always so freaking jealous because those presents were always stuff I wanted, But they were going off into the nothingness, as far as I was concerned. And I talked later one day to Dave and my sister Carol and Joe, and they never got any of that stuff. I was always so pissed. Then it's like, okay, once I found out they never got it, where the fuck did it go? They were always cool shit. I mean, I'll never forget a hatchet, a really nice one that one of Dave or Joe was getting, probably Joe. But they never received any of that stuff because their mom didn't, she villainized my dad, and she told them that my dad used to abuse her and all this kind of stuff. My sister did tell me, Carol, did tell me about something my dad did one time, which I could believe because my dad was definitely not a perfect man. We're all imperfect, But my dad, when in his younger years, my dad was really winging it, and he did something very cruel. In his mind, it seemed like it was the next step needed. And I can believe that he did it. My brother Joe apparently wet the bed, as a bit of an older boy. And my dad had been working on the roof, so there was a ladder up on the house. And so my dad put Joe over his shoulder, carried him up the ladder, set him on the peak of the roof, and just left him there in his underwear that he peed in. And he was terrified. The kid was terrified. Of all the things that they said that my dad did, their mom told him that my dad abused her. I don't believe that. Of all the fights my mom and dad got into, he never even came close to raise his hand to her. Or touching her, for that matter, forcefully. So I'm like, no, I don't buy that. I've seen his behavior at his worst, and that's not happening. But when she told me what he did to Joe, and then knowing how Joe turned out later, now that partly partly the turnout for Joe wasn't, partly that wasn't my dad's fault. There's no way that somebody can cause schizophrenia. It's a biological thing. But Joe couldn't have been okay, after his father did something like that to him. And I'm thinking that couldn't have been the only incident. My dad could be really harsh. He grew up really, really harshly, in a very impatient, no bullshit house, and I could totally see that. I'm glad he outgrew that shit. My dad, he was 31 when I was born, so I'm glad he outgrew that by the time I came around. That's one of the problems with people having kids too young is they do crazy shit when they think they're being smart. They think, they think they're solving something. My dad was really big time in the Bible, I got whippings on a real regular basis, and it was always the belt, And for a while, I as a little kid, I used to watch this cartoon called Sinbad the Sailor. We just called Sinbad. And this character in the cartoon would pull his belt when he needed superpowers, and all of a sudden he would get stacked with the muscles and stuff, and he would beat the enemies and the bullies or whatever. And for a little while, when I was 5 or 6, I thought my dad was Sinbad because he had been a sailor. Even when he wasn't in the Navy anymore, I knew my dad was a sailor. He just had to be doing something else. And I saw my dad pull his belt off on a regular basis, and then all hell broke loose. And so at some point, I assimilated those two ideas that, wait a minute, this cartoon is actually talking about my dad. I know my dad's famous because I've heard stories from people that know him and stuff that they know that at one time he was on the news and all kinds of stuff. He's Sinbad the Sailor. Because I got whipped so often. Like, definitely, usually once a week, if not more. My entire childhood. One time when I was 15, my dad, we were building a picket fence together. We were always building stuff or fixing stuff together. And I must have said something smart, where that he was telling me to do something, and I reacted the way a 14, 15-year-old would, And we had just put a picket up on the fence, and he snatched it off the fence in a second, in a blink, and started smacking me with it. Now, we had just hung that damn thing. Why couldn't he have hit me with one of the boards we hadn't just hung? But at the time, literally all I could think of, hey, at least he's not getting me with the nail side. And I was thinking, I was actually thankful for that at the moment when I was getting smacked. He was smacking me from the head to toes, man. But I was no little boy or anything like that, I was blocking, and in fact, by that time, I was quite a fighter. And it didn't matter, though. That guy right there, he was like 5'7", and he had more energy, more adrenaline than anybody I'd ever met, even reflecting back on my life. As small as he was, like 145 pounds, it wouldn't have mattered. I used to have this dog that was little named Jose. And when that dog came up against like a Rottweiler or somebody that was pissing him off, he would stand up on their chest. He'd put his front paws on that dog's chest and look at me and go, imagine he was a cute little dog, but he had the personality of a Chihuahua, and all these other dogs are looking at him like, what am I supposed to do? Should I attack this? Am I in danger? That was my dad. I never saw him fight except for one time. It was not really a fight. It was two fellas that were cussing a bunch in front of my mom and us kids. And my dad said, hey, there's kids over here. And they didn't give a fuck what he was saying. I don't know if they were drinking or what, but they said something smart in return, which included some cuss words, and he just took a few steps over to them. Both of them went into the ocean. We were at Alsea Bay. We ran a moorage there for about 6 months for fun for a friend, and this is in Waldport, Oregon. And we were by some docks that the shop we worked at was right by. And he literally just took 2 or 3 steps toward him, and they raised their hands like they were going to defend themselves or whatever. And it wasn't like that at all. Nobody got a swing out. Nobody got a good quality block or anything like that out. He didn't try to hit him. He didn't hug him, like a bear hug type of thing. Nothing like that. I was watching the whole thing, every second of it. And each one of them, one by one, and it all happened in a couple seconds, grabbed one and then started to pick him up with the one hand, touched him with the other hand, and whoop, over the side of this gangway and into the water. That guy went. He turned around to the other guy who was within reach then. Again, one hand, touched him with the other hand, and then whoop, into the water. Now, for a little fella to take 2 young guys, they had to be in their 20s, but normal size guys, 5'9", 5'10", and just so easily put them into the water like that. It wasn't just like pushing them into the water. He had to throw them over a railing, that was 4 feet tall. He had to throw them both, and he was a couple feet from the railing. They weren't standing on the gangway. They were standing on the grass next to the gangway. And if you threw them too shallow, they'd hit rocks below. So he had to throw them at least 5 feet so that they would, 1, go over the gangway railing, and 2, not hit the rocks below. And both of them easy as pie. He had the same kind of adrenaline thing that I've got going on, that I've always had going on, where that he made it look easy. And he was no trained fighter. I mean, I have way more training in fighting than my dad did, because he never trained, ever, not once in his life, other than with some friends maybe, but nothing organized. That was my dad. One time I in two different occasions I watched him make men cry, because they thought he was going to kick their ass. One of them was a fellow that I knew in high school, a grown man, one of their friends, kind of friends of friends, and it was one of the very few times. Now this is when I'm 16. My oldest brother, sister, and all 3 of his first kids were there visiting with their children. And their children were little bitties, like 4, 5, 6, that kind of thing. And they were running around, and we lived in that little house right on, in a neat little town, right on a harbor, where there was lots and lots of boats parked, at these slips and stuff. So ours was the only house that was on the harbor. And so everybody was running around having fun. All the kids, it was like an event. It was like almost like a Christmas dinner kind of thing, but not in a bad time of the year. It was like summer. And the kids were running. They shouldn't have been doing it. There were signs everywhere not to, and somebody should have been paying more attention to them. But they were running around our backyard, and then they were running down the gangway, which is totally on the Mississippi River, by the way. And there's a little harbor, where the slips are and stuff. And yeah, I heard the alarm, in case you were wondering. Anyway, and they were running in front of this guy's boat and stuff, and he was, and they were just sitting on the front of their boat, like on the weekend, sipping something and trying to relax. And they had a houseboat or whatever, and they were yelling at the kids. And somebody, and I know the guy, he was a crass fella, and especially when drinking, he'd been a loud, crass fella. one of the kids came over, one of my nephews or nieces came over and said something to my dad, who was their grandpa, who never, I think he had never seen them before this time. And came over and said, the man said this to us. And it was something that would, the other fellows got thrown off the dock for, And oh boy, that was not cool. My dad, I mean, I didn't pay mind to it. I knew who did it. I didn't hear it or anything like that, but I knew who he was. He was no threat whatsoever. And but he was a big fella, especially compared to my dad. But my dad went down there to say something to him, and I really thought that's all it was going to be. But once he started walking down that gangway toward that dock, I realized, oh shit, my dad's pissed. He's not just going to go talk to him. He's mad. He's going to go give it to him one way or the other. I didn't think he was going to fight him because, like I say, he's not a fighter. Not that he couldn't, just that he didn't. And looked away, looked back, and there my dad is standing in front of that boat with that fella and his wife. His wife is one of my friends to this day. And he's on the dock. The boat's kind of raised, and they're a little higher up than my dad is. And then that guy's standing up, trying to talk to him, and I could see him. I can't hear anything. I can see the body language and stuff. And my dad is pointing at him like this, and just pissed off faced. I mean, if I'd have gotten closer, he'd have been probably spitting at the side of his mouth or whatever. He looked pissed. And the guy's wife was crying. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And this is when I'm like up on this deck that I had to get off of to get down to the yard to try to get over there and stuff. I didn't even get off of the deck before my dad started heading back. I was like, okay, well, everybody's safe. That's what matters. And so I didn't bother to get off the deck. I was heading to getting off the deck when I saw that. And about a year later, I saw the lady somewhere, and I said, hey, I'm sorry about what happened with Dad that one day. And she took this deep breath, like in her mind, there must have been a feud or something with us, like we all hated them now or something. And nobody hated anybody. My dad probably wasn't even mad at him anymore. And yeah, I heard the alarm. It's been over half an hour. 37 minutes, in fact. But anyway, she recounted it to me. And I had said, even, what happened? I saw it. I just didn't hear it or anything like that. What happened? And she, recounted it to me without any kind of stank, because she was embarrassed by it. And she felt like that everybody knew my dad to be an ultra, ultra nice, kind person. Nobody had ever seen that side of him. Very few people had in the world, unless you lived with him. You live with him long enough and you'll see that side. And she told me that Bill was the guy's name. I shouldn't say that, but had cried about it a little bit and had later felt so guilty that they made my dad react that way, that they basically had abused his grandkids. Oh my Lord. But he's if the guy had said the wrong thing, my dad would have been up his front of his shirt and would have been visiting him in his face, and there'd have been problems, Bill would have been swimming. But I didn't go that direction. Another time, when I was in high school, he went into my principal's office, and the whole front wall was glass. So I was sitting in the place where bad kids have to sit to wait for their parents when there's problems. They're talking to the principal. And the principal and the head gym teacher were in there. Both of those fellows were like 6'5", and my dad was 5'7". And my dad started talking to him with his hands on his hips, and I'm like, at the time, I'm just sitting there going, "Oh no, this ain't gonna be good," because I knew he was already pissed when he went in the door, and I knew he wasn't pissed at me. I knew why he was mad, and so I was a little worried about how this was going to go. And looked away, looked at the receptionist, and she kind of looked at me, raised her eyebrows a little bit, like, oh. I looked back over, and I'm like, oh shit, my dad, both of these guys now were standing up in front of my dad, almost like they're trying to intimidate him. And he was looking up at him like this. And I can't hear a word he's saying. I could just see his face and his doing this to their faces. And they started out with this mean look on their faces, like they were going to show him down. He's going to capitulate to our demands or whatever. Boy, I'll tell you, 2 seconds later, both of their faces were red. Both of their faces had contorted in a different direction. Now one of them looked straight scared. And he was the tallest one, the main gym teacher. He looked like he was scared, like this was about to go bad. The principal, who had been a big athlete, in high school and college, had a look on his face that was, oh shit, I'm in the wrong. Oh shit, we could all be arrested. Kind of, like that. I don't know. But it definitely did not look angry anymore. He was backpedaling as fast as he could, whatever he was doing. And both of them, it was all about my dad. Yeah, that was my dad. Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to stop this video now after I told you that. One day I'll tell the rest of that story, because it was actually kind of fun, kind of cool. To me, not to my dad, not to a few people in my town. It was a small town, but to me it was hilarious and perfect, But anyway, I'm going to let you go. Steve Underwood signing off. Have a great day. From Baton Rouge. Have a great day.